Welcome to Paper Simplified, a deep dive brought to you by SILMA AI. And we are back with another fascinating paper. This time it's DAPO, an open source LLM reinforcement learning system at scale. You actually flagged this one for us. What was it that really grabbed your attention?
We keep seeing these amazing things that large language models, LLMs, are doing with reasoning,
Yeah.
but the actual techniques, specifically using reinforcement learning, or RL, for those really complex tasks, are often kept under wraps.
Right.
It's kind of like everybody gets to admire the skyscraper, but only a handful of people actually know how it was engineered.
Yeah, it's true.
This paper is trying to lift the veil a little
I
bit.
see.
They actually say, the researchers, that this lack of transparency is a big challenge for the whole research community.
Yeah.
It makes it harder to understand, reproduce, and build on these new developments.
Right.
So this paper directly addresses that by making everything open source. Their algorithm, the training code, even the data set they created.
Okay, so a real push for more collaboration and open science. That's great.
Absolutely.
And they're really focusing on training LLMs for very demanding tasks, things like competitive math problems, specifically the AIM. What are the unique challenges that they're trying to tackle in this particular area?
Well, they point out that if you just try to use basic RL methods, straightforward ones, to train LLMs for this kind of deep reasoning,
Yeah.
you run into certain roadblocks.
Okay.
Things like entropy collapse.
Okay.
That's when the model's responses become too predictable, and reward noise, which throws off the learning process,
Got it.
and then just general instability during training.
Okay.
So these are all hurdles that DAPO is specifically designed to overcome.
Okay, so DAPO is their solution for kind of cracking this nut, pushing the boundaries of what LLMs can do with reasoning.
Exactly.
What were they able to achieve with it? Give us the headline results.
So the big result is that DAPO, using the Q-AIM 2.532b base model, got a score of 50 points on the AIM 2024 math competition. And to put that into perspective, the previous best, the state-of-the-art, was DeepSeek-R10 Quen32b, which scored 47,
Okay.
but DAPO did it in half the training time.
Oh, wow.
So not only is it more effective, it's also way more efficient.
Yeah, half the training time is a massive difference in terms of the resources required. That's incredible. So how does DAPO actually work? What are the core innovations here?
So DAPO stands for Decoupled Clip and Dynamic Sampling Policy Optimization.
Okay.
And it's an algorithm that's made for large-scale LLM reinforcement learning. The aim is to get LLMs to show those complex reasoning behaviors,
Right.
like self-verification, iterative refinement, all the things you need for those super tough problems.
Yeah.
At its core, there's this objective function which guides how the LLM learns. It builds on existing RL techniques like proximal policy optimization, or PPO,
Okay.
and group relative policy optimization, GRPO.
Right.
But importantly, it figures out where these techniques fall short when you're dealing with the really long chains of thought needed for complex reasoning.
So it's not just about getting to the right answer.
No.
It's about showing your work, essentially.
Exactly. It's about that step-by-step reasoning. So let's break down these key techniques that make DAPO special.
Okay.
The first one is clip higher.
Clip higher. Okay.
This tackles that entropy collapse problem we talked about.
Right.
Think of it like this. If an LLM's answers are always too similar, it's not really exploring different ways to solve problems.
Yeah.
Standard PPO, it uses this clipping mechanism to keep the policy updates stable.
Okay.
What DAPO does, it's clever, it decouples the lower and upper limits of this clipping range.
Okay.
They call them LO and high.
So the standard clipping was maybe a bit too restrictive.
That's exactly the insight.
Okay.
They found that the usual upper limit on the clipping was holding back the less likely exploration tokens more than the tokens that the model already preferred.
Interesting.
In their data, those maximum clipped probabilities were often below 0.2, really low.
Okay.
So by raising that upper clipping range,
Yeah.
they give the model more space to explore those less probable paths.
I see. I see.
Makes sense, right?
It does.
So they used a high of 0.28 while keeping ELO at 0.2.
Okay.
Seems like a small change, but it gives those less frequent tokens more freedom to increase in probability,
Yeah.
and that boosts the overall entropy of the policy.
Okay.
If you look at Figure 2 of the paper, you see it led to a better aim accuracy and more diverse reasoning. It stops the model from getting stuck in a rut.
That makes sense. More exploration, better solutions. What's the next big idea?
The second technique is called dynamic sampling.
Dynamic sampling. Okay.
This one deals with an interesting problem that crops up during training. You get some prompts that just always lead to the right answer, like 100% of the time.
Right.
Now, the way GPO calculates advantage,
Yeah.
which is basically how much better an action is compared to the average, it ends up with a zero advantage for these prompts.
Okay.
And zero advantage means no learning signal, no improvement.
Right. The model isn't learning from its success in those cases.
Exactly. Those prompts become dead weight for training.
I see.
Figure 3b in the paper, it actually shows how These consistently correct samples just keep piling up as training goes on.
Okay.
So what DAPO does, it oversamples prompts
Yeah.
and then filters out the ones where all the answers are either perfect or totally wrong.
Okay.
The point is to make sure every prompt is actually teaching the model something new.
Right. It's about focusing on the areas where the model can still grow.
That's it. And you might think generating more samples would be less efficient,
Yeah.
but the paper points out that the generation time is usually dominated by the more difficult cases anyway.
Okay.
And here's the really interesting part.
Yeah.
Dynamic sampling can actually speed up the whole convergence. Figure 6 shows that.
So it's counterintuitive, but by choosing the training data more carefully, they're making things faster.
Exactly. Now, the third technique is the token-level policy gradient loss.
Token-level policy gradient loss.
Bit of a mouthful. This gets into the nitty-gritty of how GPO calculates the loss. The loss is how off the model's predictions are.
Right.
GPO, it does this at the sample level. It averages the losses for all the tokens in an answer and then across all the answers.
Okay.
But the researchers realized that when you have these long chains of reasoning,
Yeah.
this way of doing things can give less importance to the tokens in longer answers.
So a mistake in the later parts of a really detailed answer might get lost in the average.
You got it.
Okay.
This can actually mess up the learning from those really good long answers, and it might not punish bad patterns enough in those super long bad quality answers.
Right.
And that can lead to more randomness and just longer responses for no reason. Figure 4 shows you that.
Yeah, okay.
So DAPO takes a different approach. It calculates the loss at the individual token level.
So each token counts the same no matter how long the response is.
Exactly. By doing that, the patterns that lead to changes in the reward, they get reinforced or suppressed consistently.
Okay.
And naturally, longer sequences, because they have more tokens, they end up having more influence on the gradient update.
It's more precise way to train, especially when each step in the reasoning really matters.
They nailed it. Okay, ready for the final technique.
Yeah, hit me with it.
All right, it's called overlong reward shaping.
Overlong reward shaping. Okay.
Now, in RL, you usually set a limit on how long the generated responses can be.
Mm-hmm.
Anything longer gets cut off, truncated.
Right.
A typical approach is to just give a negative reward to all the truncated samples.
Okay.
But the DAPO folks, they realized this can create noise in the rewards because a perfectly good answer
Yeah.
could get penalized just for being a little too long.
Right, like penalizing a good answer because it took a few extra steps to explain.
Exactly. First, they tried something called overlong filtering. They basically just ignored the loss for the truncated samples.
Okay.
And that actually showed big improvements in stability and performance. You could see that in Figure 5.
Okay.
But they took it a step further and came up with soft overlong punishment.
Soft overlong punishment.
Instead of that harsh negative reward, they defined a punishment interval close to that maximum length.
Got it.
Within that interval, the penalty increases gradually the longer the response gets.
Okay.
If it goes beyond the absolute maximum, then it still gets a hard penalty of -1.
Okay.
It's like, hey, try to keep it concise, but we won't punish you too harshly if you go a little over, as long as you're on the right track.
It's a gentler nudge in the right direction.
Exactly. And then finally, we should talk about their dataset transformation.
Okay.
Because answers in math competitions can be in all sorts of formats.
Right, yeah.
It makes it tricky to calculate rewards automatically.
Makes sense.
So they created this new data set called DAPO Math 17K.
DAPO Math 17K. Okay.
Taking inspiration from the AIM format, they prompted the LLM to actually rephrase questions so that the answer would always be an integer.
Oh, wow.
Appendix A gives you an example. They take an answer like 112266 and turn it into a question that asks for k plus m plus n, where the answer has to be in the format k, m, y.
Okay.
And that gives you a nice, clean integer answer, 19.
So they're standardizing the answers, making the reward calculation much easier.
Exactly. This direct equivalence check, you can see it in equation 7, really simplifies the learning.
Very clever. So we've got these 4 key technical innovations: click higher, dynamic sampling, token level policy gradient loss, and overlong reward shaping, plus this clever dataset transformation. And it all comes together to produce a big jump in performance and efficiency on a really hard benchmark.
That's DAPO in a nutshell.
Amazing.
And the ablation studies, they're in Table 1, they really show how each of these techniques contributes to the improvement. They also had some insightful observations about monitoring the training dynamics, things like response length and entropy, which helps us understand how the RL is working.
Right.
And then there's this emergence of reflective behavior in the model. Table 2 and Appendix B showcase this, where it actually starts double-checking its own reasoning.
Oh, wow.
That's super interesting. It shows the potential for RL to really shape those sophisticated problem-solving abilities in AI.
Yeah, it suggests that these models aren't just getting better at finding the answer, they're getting better at the process of thinking itself,
Exactly.
which is pretty profound if you think about it.
The fact that their reasoning strategies change as they train is a huge takeaway from this work.
Okay, so to wrap up our deep dive into this really interesting paper, what are the main takeaways, the novel contributions of this DAPO system?
So just to recap, some of the key takeaways and novel aspects of this paper include the introduction and validation of those four techniques: clip hire, which stops entropy collapse; dynamic sampling, which boosts training efficiency; token-level policy gradient loss, which helps with long chains of thought; and soft overlong punishment, which reduces noise in the rewards.
Okay.
They also created and open-sourced the DAPO Math 17K dataset, which is specifically made to make reward calculation easier for those complex math problems. It's a big step forward for research. And that observation about the emergence of reflective reasoning, that's a really exciting glimpse into how LLMs are developing under the enforcement learning. It suggests AI might be able to come up with entirely new ways to solve problems.
Yeah.
Making the algorithm, code, and dataset open source just makes this work even more valuable for the research community as a whole.
It's exciting to see this kind of progress and transparency in the field. So big thanks to you for bringing this paper to our attention. It's been a really enlightening deep dive. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on Paper Simplified. We'll be back with more fascinating research breakdowns soon. Until then, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep simplifying the complex.